Welcome. I'm your host, Stefano, and this is When Leaders Talk, a podcast about leadership and, most importantly, about leaders. Self-awareness is probably the word that you're going to hear the most during this episode, because self-awareness is the starting point if you want to be a successful leader or if you want to have success in general. Self-awareness is something I really work very often on when I have clients. And it is really not just understanding what are your weaknesses or what are your strengths. Self-awareness goes beyond that. Is what is important to you, what are your values, your reference system, what is your vision, is what motivates you, what keeps you going on every day, even among difficulties. And Paul Shannon, the guest for the episode number 15 of this podcast, is one of those people, one of those few people that actually has a great self-awareness. Paul Shannon is the co-founder and the co-CEO of OBT Advisory, a consulting group in the UK. Before that, he has worked for many years in ANS, a similar company still in the UK, and he reached the position of CEO there before deciding to launch his own activities, his own business. And this step highlights one of the many qualities actually Paul will share during this conversation, that is bravery. He was the CEO of a company. He was able to increase the business value of the company from 10 million pounds to 40 million pounds of yearly income. And yet, with his friend Chris, he decided to launch his own business. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of self-awareness. It takes a lot of bravery, as I said. And it also takes a lot in the decision-making process. We've been talking about many things, and of course, I cannot really summarize everything in these few minutes, but there are a few aspects I really think is important to share here. One is the adaptability as an essential quality for leaders. It's not just because times are changing, as we discussed, but also because situations are different. The second thing is about feedbacks. If you want to grow as a leader, you need to understand that you need feedbacks from someone else, someone you trust. And it's not just feedbacks, it's also listen to those, understanding that those are elements you can use to be a better person or a better leader. Another aspect we've been talking about is that his partner in OBT is, as we mentioned, Chris, who is also his best friend. And I asked him, how do you actually balance, your partnership with this person, with the friendship? Sometimes you might have conflict, and it's not easy. And I have seen many friendships actually dissolve because they were also partner in business. Well, the formula that Paul suggests is based on one keyword: trust. And with trust comes direct communication and the willingness, once again, to listen. Well, there is much more to really listen in this episode, so I'm not going to share everything with you. But talking about self-awareness, let me tell you that on the 29th of June, so if you listen to this podcast before the date, I will be hosting a free webinar on self-awareness from noon p.m. to 1:15 p.m. Eastern Times, American Eastern Times. You can register. I will put the link in the description of this podcast. And as I said, it's going to be free, and I hope you to see you there. Also, you can follow me on my social media, that is on LinkedIn, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And you can also check my website, masteryourc.com. All right. I think I've said enough, and it's time to give the word to Paul Shannon. So welcome to this episode, and with us we have Paul Shannon, that is the founder and co-CEO of OBT Advisory. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks, Stefano.
Yeah, and I really like talking to people coming from different field in any industry, companies, and your company comes from basically is a consulting company, right?
Correct.
So you deal with a lot of people, you deal with a lot of leaders. So the good thing of your job is not just that you lead people, but actually you have to talk to other leaders and interact with them and convince them. Of course, you have to sell your product and everything else. We will go into it. Don't worry. We don't have to say everything now, because as always, my question to start is, Paul, do you have a definition of leadership? And if you have, what is it?
I suppose for me, it is about leading from the front and making those really, really tough decisions, being able to put yourself out there. But primarily, it is about adaptability, I think, is to being a good leader, especially in tech, because everything just seems to be in constant change. And if you can't adapt and embrace even change, just this constant change over and over again, then I think you really struggle to be a strong leader and a strong leader of other teams, because you may well have a really strong leadership team around you and a really great team across the whole business, but not every single person will have a first reaction of embracing change and adapting to change. Some people need to be helped to get there, and they need to be able to look at not necessarily a single person. But I'm a firm believer in actually leadership it's about having a great team around you. But then lots of people will need the team to believe it and to show them that they believe it. So you've got to be really adaptable to change. And obviously the really obvious one is just surrounding yourself with really great, what I would call sensational people, and leaders who don't embrace having excellent people around them. I think even though they may well be able to do a large portion of the leadership role themselves, they sort of fool themselves into believing that it's all about them. And it never is.
No. And you use the word sensational. I'm very curious what you mean by that.
Well, it's not that easy to distill down, but I'll give it a go. So for me, sensational is people that, even those ones that don't immediately go, yes, some more change, let's go for it, is that they embrace it and they go, right, okay, I know this is for the good of the customers, for the good of the business, it's for the good of the evolution of the business, but actually, really importantly, it's good for the evolution of myself as an individual, to push myself out of the comfort zone and just to keep learning and keep being better all the time. But also there is that sort of the side of it when it comes to being sensational, of just being really great people to be around. For me, I use the phrase about just surrounding yourself by people who've got really good energy, and the rest of it sort of looks after itself, and that's in life as well as work.
And I can see actually the energy that you have. So I guess they have to pair your energy, and that might be a challenge. So how do you select sensational people? I guess you go through interview and everything. What is the characteristic that you look for in people?
Well, I suppose for me, I'm better at certain types of selection than I am others. So for me, I've always had an ethos. I've been brought up in a business at A&S actually, but prior to OBT. That's really where I made my name, and and built a lot of success with a great team. Actually, it's about selecting people that are already around you. If you have that right culture at the beginning, and it isn't necessarily that you that's selecting all the future leaders, it's all of the all of the management team are selecting the people that they believe are going to be the best candidates in their teams going forward. And the skill I suppose I had, which I was really good at, was recognizing people within the business who had a talent, flair, that kind of sensational element, to make them into the best versions of themselves that they could possibly be. And of a director team, so the board, effectively A&S, before we ended up merging, there were eight or nine people that were either on the board or around the board. and all except for one had been there for many, many years and been appointed through the business. And again, with the exception of one, none of them had been directors before A&S. They'd all moved through the business. And for some people, you can say, well, that's a little bit insular, but actually, that approach took us from when I started, we're about 11 to 12 million turnover. And when I left, it was 150 million turnover. So we didn't always get it right. Well, we often got it right actually when it came to board selections. We didn't get it all right every single time. But when we got it right, we got it really right.
Okay, but it seems like you have the ability to choose those future leaders, those managers, those sensational people. But what if they are not ready yet to be a leader? I mean, one of my point is that leaders are not born. You can actually develop your leadership skills, improve them, and be a great leader, even if you don't have all the right skills at the beginning. So how do you develop leadership in a person that is talented but does not have everything just yet?
It's a really good question, and I can use an example for myself. So when I was sort of on the path to become the CEO, when I was COO, Chief Operating Officer before that, the incumbent CEO was a guy called Paul Sweeney, who was a really, really awesome guy. Really, a lot of mentoring, a lot of pushing me out of my comfort zone. And believe it or not, I've got strong energy, and you would imagine I'm an extremely social person in all environments. But actually, that's become a little bit from learned behaviour, because I was never. I'm really comfortable with people that I know. And I can be quite dominant in the room with people that I know. But in the past, and prior to becoming CEO, it was not my favourite thing to do, to go to networking events full of strangers. It wasn't my strong point. It wasn't what I enjoyed doing. And there was a period where, and this is what I mean about, but leaders, you're very correct, leaders are not necessarily born. You have to learn some of the behaviour. And Paul Sweeney sort of realised that I was avoiding those networking events with customers, suppliers, that kind of stuff. It was, I would go, but I wouldn't necessarily perform the way that you would expect a CEO to perform. And he took me to one side and he said, listen, you cannot be the CEO of this business or any other business unless you are capable of walking into one of those rooms, putting your hand out and say, hi, I'm Paul Shannon from A&S, and just talk to them and get to know them. And you're really good at it when you know the people, but you're going to have to get good at it with people that you don't know. So that sort of, you're right, almost nobody is fully prepared, because if you leave it until they're fully prepared, you're missing out on the potential that they could achieve whilst they're still learning. So for me, it's always been okay to push someone out of the comfort zone, push them into a leadership role, as long as you genuinely and deeply believe that they can make it and they're going to get there, which is the most important part. They will make mistakes. There will be parts of their personality or their skill set or whatever it may be that's deficient for that role. But as long as you know what they are, or you recognize them early enough, but you're willing to invest the time in mentoring that person, sending them to training, coaching, giving them assigning them, which I've done a number of times, with a friendly mentor in the industry to say, listen, this person I really believe in, but you've done this role much better than I did it in the past. Can you please just kind of put you together with them, and can you just keep in touch with them, meet them occasionally, and just help this person be the best person they can be? It's okay for them not to be the finished article. In fact, I think if you wait until they're the finished article, it's probably a waste of the talent up until that point.
You mentioned coaching. That, of course, I think is the best tool you can use ever. But I'm kidding you not. I mean, and actually, I've been talking with HR people, and they do agree that coaching, generally speaking, is a great way, because mentors, they show you how they do it because they have the experience. The coach will make you understand how you will do it, so it's more rooted into you, and everything is aligned with your values and the person that you are. And therefore, you can follow that path that really stays with you, at least for longer. But do you say something that I really like earlier when you talk about network? Because one of the things that many people underestimate is the importance of networking. Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm so good in my job, I don't need to talk to anyone because I'm freaking good. They will recognize my value, and that's true, they will at some point. But unfortunately, you need to have the ability to sell yourself, right? Yeah. And going back to your definition of leadership, you talk about adaptability, and it's something that today is very much important. I mean, every day is important, not like just today. How you have a decades-long experience, right? What is the change that you've noticed in leadership and in leaders? What is that you need today that probably you didn't need yesterday to be an effective and successful leader?
Yeah, Chris Hodgson and I, who's my business partner at OBT. We talked about this a lot in the run up to becoming CEO and COO, and have talked about it and stood by our principles all the way ever since. And I grew up in IT in the era of banging on tables, sometimes what you would call humiliation in the sales team, borderline bullying sometimes, not within the leaders, not the people who mentored me, but you saw it in the IT industry, and we were never for that. It just wasn't us. It's like that's not the best way to get the best out of most people. So personally, and I'm sure this is deep rooted in my childhood somewhere, even though I had a lovely childhood and my parents are fabulous. I thrive on negative feedback, so I don't need to be patted on the back and said, "Oh, well done for this." These 10 things that you did. I will focus myself on the one thing I didn't do well. That's just the way I am, and I'll make sure that if I can fix the thing that I didn't do well, I will, and I'll focus on that. Or if I do it again next time, I'll do a much better job than I did the previous time. That's just the way my brain is wired. However, Chris and I probably both quite similar in that way, but we also recognize that maybe 90% of people or more don't thrive on negative feedback. They thrive on being told that they're capable of doing more, helping them make them comfortable enough outside of their comfort zone, so they feel like they've got a support structure. So scaffolding, as the the more modern phrase is, scaffolding around them, so that if they do fail, that's okay. It is okay to fail, because it just means that you're pushing yourself really, really hard, and it's a totally unreasonable expectation of anyone to say, "I'm going to give you 10 tasks and I want them all done perfectly." You can't fail at any of them. It's a totally and utterly unrealistic expectation. And if your expectation is that, you're either a poor leader, or you've given someone too many tasks that you should have known they were incapable of completing to a good level. So that's why we've always taken this sort of more supportive, tough. It's a tough environment to work with Chris and I. Because we do push people really, really hard, but not in that kind of old school negative feedback. You're not good enough, whipping. More carrot and less stick is probably the best way of describing it. It's like, you are good enough to do this. You are going to do it, and we're going to be behind you. If you do need to pick up the phone, or you do need to drop us a message and say, "Listen, I've made a mistake." That's okay. Just tell us as soon as you possibly can, because a mistake caught early can be rectified much more easily than something that's been dragged on. And generally speaking, when mistakes drag on, it's because the person doesn't feel comfortable enough, or that they're going to get supported for reporting something that they've made a mistake on. And that's, again, the fault of the leader, not the individual.
Right. So, and you show open-mindedness when you're open mind, when basically you are able to accept a negative feedback. It's such an important tool, right? Because we're all good and we like to hear, "Oh, you're so good, you're so great, don't worry." But it's hard to hear people telling us what's wrong with us or what can we do better, right? How do you nurture there? How do you keep an open mind? I don't know if there is something that you would suggest doing to, because it's, as I say, it's hard. So how do you do that?
It's down to the individuals that you're working with. So if you genuinely have a belief that every time someone in the team, and bearing in mind, Chris and I spent a lot of time knowing as many of the people that worked at A&S as we possibly could, as many from junior apprentices. We didn't know everybody, of course. There were far too many, 750 people by the time we left. But before we merged with UK Fast, and we were about 250 people, we pretty much knew everybody. And when you make that level of effort, you should be in a position where you accept that all of the people that are there want to do the right thing. They want to do well. So if you believe that when you wake up in the morning, then how on earth could you possibly find yourself in a situation where you're anything other than nurturing and supportive when mistakes are made? Because you know that person is a good person and wants to do well. So if you started shouting at people or castigating for making a mistake, then you're either a hypocrite or you don't believe that they're there for the right reasons in the first place. And I'm neither a hypocrite. I'm not a hypocrite at all. I know that I'm not going to say one thing and say, listen, we're going to support you. And then when they come to ask for some support, completely renege on that offer at the first opportunity. It's just not our style. So I think it's a cultural thing, really. And it's probably got something to do with the way you're brought up and the people that you surround yourself with. So yes, I've got a lot of self-awareness. So like I said, when I've made a mistake, the first person that knows that I've made a mistake is me. And I'm expecting to be told, listen, that wasn't good enough. And if the mistake was big enough, and I've had multiple instances of this over the years through my career, the first person that I called would either have been Scott Fletcher, who was the founder of ANS, or Paul Sweeney, who at the time will have been the CEO, and say, listen, I've made a mistake here. And the reaction was usually, positive. Sometimes there was frustration, but I understood there was going to be some frustration because I didn't intend to make the mistake that I did make. But I always had a plan to say, listen, this has gone wrong, but I'm going to do this, and this to try and rectify it. So it's very, very difficult, really, if you believe that people are genuine and positive and they've got a plan or they're asking you for your help. Castigating people and reneging on the deal is just not okay under any circumstances.
Right. And, as I always say, failure is an option. We are not on a spaceship going to the moon. So failure is an option. We are humans, right? And we do mistakes. And actually it would be weird if some of us will never do mistake. I don't think that will ever exist. I'm talking in every moment of our life, in every dimension of our life. Paul, you mentioned a magic word for me that is self-awareness. And self-awareness, as I consider it, is really the starting point to success as a leader and as a person, both of it. And actually on the 29th of June, I will hold a workshop about it. So how do you become self-aware? Is there any practice that you have done in your years and you actually do every day, something you do?
I think for me, sort of by accident, really, or it took me until I got older to recognise that these two things were linked. So self-awareness, I think, for me was driven by having vision. And I don't mean visions while I'm asleep or, higher forces. I just mean having a vision for where you want to be and what you want to do and what you want to achieve. And when I always wanted to be, I was very ambitious. I joined ANS when I was a VMware consultant, a techie. And when I spoke to the leaders there that interviewed me, I thought, if these guys are the real deal and what they're talking about and the way they talk, I could be really successful at ANS. And I didn't want to be a techie all my career. I wanted to learn how to I wanted to be technical. I wanted to learn how to be commercial. I've always had a sort of mathematical brain, so I wanted to understand more about P&L, finances, business, buying business, all of that. I always wanted to do that. I joined ANS when I was 29, and I thought and within about 6 weeks, I'll give you a really short story. When I first joined ANS, I said I want to work in pre-sales, not in the consultancy business. I've been in a consultant for a long time. And the founder said to me, you can go in pre-sales when the second that you finish this job. You've got to do this job first with this consultancy contract for a customer. You have to do this first. We think it's a 6-month job, but if you do it earlier, then you can get into pre-sales earlier. So I said, okay, this is a test. So I went and pretty much moved to Birmingham, which is where the customer was from, Warrington, which is where I'm from. And I moved to Birmingham and I completed the job in 3.5 months. And I went back with a signed statement of work to the founder and said, right, I've done this job now. You said I could go in pre-sales. Can I go in pre-sales? And he said, yes. So I thought, okay, right. So this is the real deal. And every single time after that, I sort of envisioned right, I need to, this is where I want to be. These are the steps that I'm going to have to prove that I've completed. So if I want to go from pre-sales and I want to become a manager, I'm going to have to prove that I can do, I'm going to, X, Y, Z tasks beforehand. So I need to find ways and opportunities to say, put my hand up for something to say, this sort of fits one of my steps. So I'll put my hand up, even though I've probably got no right to put my hand up, because I'm not the person who knows this now, but I'm going to learn it. I'm going to do it because that's one step closer to the actual vision. And I had that for when I became managed services director. I didn't know a lot about managed services, but I made it my business to learn. And so the reason that's linked to self-awareness for me is if you don't have self-awareness, then you don't know what your deficiencies are, because you think you're really good. You either think you're rubbish at everything or you think you're great at everything. Whereas I know I'm really good at some things and I'm not very good at others. Some of the things that I knew I wasn't very good at, I thought, I can learn that. That's not beyond the wit of me. I can do that. If that person knows it, they're no cleverer than I am. They're no more ambitious than I am. They're no more hardworking than I am. If they know it, I must be able to learn it. And that was never a sort of negative towards the other person. It was more about just me believing that I could get there. And so that kind of self-awareness helps you recognize, I don't know how to do that yet, but I can learn it, so I'm going to. And those are the sort of, that self-awareness helps you take that next step each time to get to your goal or your vision or whatever it is. And the sort of the pinnacle of that for me and Chris was when we created, I don't know if you're aware of the book Vivid Vision, but there's a book called Vivid Vision. It talks about how to instill really massive goals within a business and get people bought into it. And Chris and I spent a lot of time coming up with a vivid vision for A&S, which we launched not long after we'd merged with UK Fast. And to get everyone bought into this, massive transformation that needed to be undertaken, get people to understand why it was necessary. And we had a lot of steps, to everything from buying in the technical team to holding a huge summer event that everyone could feel part of. And these were all steps to get to a vision. And again, that self-awareness thing comes in. It can't just be me that stands up on the stage on my own, expected to be such a good leader that I can do that on my own. But I understood and recognised my deficiencies as to where they were, and we got lots of other people involved.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this story, because it really shows the importance of self-awareness and the magic that you can do with it if you really take time. This is most of the people think they don't have time for that. They don't have time to reflect on themselves, and actually, they should understand is that it's like an investment. You're investing on you to be better. So, and the return of investment is huge, simply huge. So, since we've been talking about self-awareness, let me ask you a question. What is your superpower? What makes you special?
Probably something not that Hollywood. I'm quite bright. I'm pretty smart. I'm quite streetwise. I've been around the block. I come from a very working class upbringing, so I've got a fight in me, to make sure that I'm, despite not being privileged, I can make my own way and just work. It's hard work, I would say. I'm willing to work harder than the average next person stood next to me, and in some cases, I'm willing to work much harder. I was never afraid of waking up at 4 a.m, driving down to a customer 5 hours away, spending all of that time there, then staying in a hotel, then working all night until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, especially once I was trying to push myself into new roles, just trying to understand and digest as much as I possibly could about what was necessary to complete the next role, or to not complete, but to start the next role, and to justify to the people who would make that decision, listen, I'm the person who should be investing in, because I was just willing to work harder than most other people, and hard work was down and was applied to these steps into the vision. It's like, it wasn't just a blanket, I'll just work all the time. It was like, no, I've got this job to do today. I need to finish this for a customer. But the second I finish that, I've got spare time, and I'm just going to apply all of that spare time and all that hard work. And if someone else is going to stay up for 2 hours after work to do some work, I'll stay up for 5 or 7. That's my superpower, is just this ability to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until I've achieved it. And then I'll then look at what the next thing is, and I'll start again, the next thing, and then I'll start again. It's just this kind of will to keep pushing and pushing. And it's the concept of forward motion is, if you read any kind of, CBT or psychology or anything like that, this constant force. And they do talk about higher forces, which I've always been a little bit skeptical about engaging in that kind of vernacular. But I see that force as just being within me. It's just, well, this is totally how hard I work and how hard I push is totally and utterly within my control. No one can stop me from doing the extra hour. No one can, no other outside forces can stop me from doing that. If I am dependent on other people, which you are sometimes, which is often also very powerful, but if I'm completely dependent on other people, then that I do have control from outside forces either helping me or stopping me. But in certain scenarios, just your own will and force can get you much, much further. So I'm just willing to just push as hard as anybody else is willing to push.
And I guess also showing your superpower as a working hard is also leading by example, right? So you show the people you work with how strong is your motivation and dedication to your task. What is your kryptonite? Since we talk about superpower, what makes you weak or weaker?
Well, I don't know if it's a weakness, but I'm so focused on doing the right thing. So there is lots of scenarios where I could make a choice that would be helpful for me, but if that choice meant that I'd have to tread on someone else or destroy someone else or even hold someone else back or push someone else back, I am not willing to make that decision. If that person is someone who doesn't deserve to be treated like that, I will never ever do that ever. It's just not my style, and I've always made the internal decision that you don't need to do that to get ahead. And I also wouldn't be able to live with myself having made those decisions, even if it made me more successful. So I've always chosen to try and do things the right way, even if it held me back. And it never held me back. And it was a phrase from when I was a kid. My dad used to say to me, doing the right thing is the right thing to do, even if it's hard. And I knew that I would never, if I built a reputation, or even if I was the only person who knew about it, of treading on people, I wouldn't be able to look my mum and dad in the eye, and I just wouldn't. So I've always made the decision that I'm going to have to do things the right way as much as I possibly could. And sometimes you are presented with really tough decisions, but as long as you're making those decisions, even if someone does get adversely impacted by it, as long as you're making those decisions for the right reasons, I can live with myself. If I'm making them because it makes me more money or it makes me more successful, that's not a road I was ever willing to go down. I'm 43 now. So if I've got to 43 and never made those decisions for those reasons, then I'm never going to do it.
And I'm smiling because you say a lot of things, and I have like a sequence of questions, but I had to follow through. First of all, talking about the right thing is always many dimensions, right? And many perspectives. So as you pointed it out, maybe it was the right thing from a career point of view, but was the wrong thing from a moral point of view, right? So it's kind of balancing this. And what you said, I wanna challenge you a little bit, because it doesn't seem like really a weakness. Actually, in a way it's a strength, right? So it's like your moral compass is stronger than your ambitions and your career ambitions and something like that. And I really admire you for this. But so let me challenge you again a little bit with trying to go deep in what's your real weakness, what is your real kryptonite, something that really, if you don't mind sharing, and then if you are willing to share, well, if you're not, that's fine. I have another 10 questions to ask you on the last thing you said. So,
well, I suppose as I've got older, I am more selective of the kinds of work that I want to do. And that can occasionally be unhelpful, because I've always tried to be a leader that would, well, anything that I'm asking you to do, I would do it with you, and I will do it as well. And as I've got older, I've been less willing to do some of the jobs that don't interest me anymore. And you could argue that you could turn around and say, well, actually, once you get to become a CEO, it is a bit about being more judicious and sensible with the jobs that are the right jobs, rather than just doing the same jobs that you've always done. So I do understand that as well. But coming from a mantra of someone who says, well, I'll just do it with you, and occasionally there is, there are occasions where you do need to dig in with your team and do something you don't really want to do. But generally speaking, there are certain jobs that I just don't want to do anymore, and I try not to. And Chris and I are business partners at OBT now. We've had a couple of conversations where we've won some pieces of work, and I was like, Chris, I don't really enjoy doing that. It's like, well, there's only two of us now, so it's tough. We've both got to do this piece of work in order to be able to get them completed. So whether you like those pieces of work or not, those pieces of work, and what I mean is, it's some of the tasks in the background, the digesting thousands of pages of documents and stuff. That's not really my thing anymore. But as Chris is like, it's tough. We're starting a new business. You need to dig in, and we've got to do it. And I do. I'd rather not.
Every time you talk, I'm writing down small words so I remember because it's like something new is opening. But let's go back to your what we call your superpower. And you say working hard. It's like you're a hard worker. How do you balance your work with your private life, your family and friends, and yourself?
With difficulty, or in the past, with difficulty, it was long periods where I did a terrible job. That I was so myopically focused on the visions and the goals for A&S that I did do a terrible job of it sometimes. And I spent any spare time I possibly could trying to make sure that I still fit the kids clubs, sports clubs with my children. But friends got very little time. Other members of family got very little time, and my parents would say, so my brother spends a lot of time with my parents and his kids and stuff, and spends lots and lots of time. I'm only now picking that back up again. So I can't, not every single part of your life. It's very difficult. And I understand the power, like from Tony Robbins and that kind of thing, about having that, the pie chart of these are the portions that you've got to, that are important to your life, like health, family, kids, work, sport, and so on, hobbies. And mine were very, very skewed for a long time. So I can't say that I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be one of those CEOs who get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, eat granola, go for a run, go to the gym, get back at 7, take the kids to school, all of that. That wasn't the way I was. And I would love to have been able to say that I could do all that, but I'm very much I'm a night owl. So I work until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and then wake up at 7 or 8. The idea for me in that period of going to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock and waking up at 3 or 4 and starting my day there, I know that's sort of the American West Coast CEO way, but it just wasn't mine. And there was periods where this is why I'm not necessarily advocating my way as the best way, it was just my way. There was periods there where you're burning the candle at both ends, and you do get fatigued, and you have to look after yourself again to make sure that you get back to the position where you feel fully recharged, usually with holidays or just taking some time out to be able to recharge. And that's why with my wider team at the time at A&S, I was very, very, very big proponents of taking 2-week holidays. And that was never the A&S way. But once I became CEO, I was like, listen, this is nonsense. You don't need to be on all the time when you're on holiday. I don't want you to be answering emails. I don't want you to be picking up phone calls. If you want to do half an hour towards the end of the day when you've spent the day with your kids and you feel recharged and you feel relaxed, just to check your phone to see if there's anything urgent, absolutely fine. But I don't want you responding to trivial emails and messages and stuff that other people in your team, or you could have handed it off to one of your fellow directors. So please don't do as I do as I say, which is, again, I know it's a little bit hypocritical, but just copying the way I live my life is not necessarily good for your personal life. It might be good for your career, but it's not necessarily good for your personal life. So yeah, there are periods there where I think, do you know what, I probably should have taken my foot off the gas for a little bit longer just to recharge. But I'm 43 now. I don't really have many regrets, because the people say that you regret things that you haven't done, and I've done most of the things that I've wanted to do.
Right. I mean, there is no the right way. There is no one way to balance life and work and everything else. It's so personal. Like for me, I will never wake up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym and do, as you say, what the CEO in the West Coast of the United States do. I mean, I would prefer, for example, a break in the day. If I want to, do sports, I would do it probably late in the morning or something like that. And that's, it fits me, and then I feel better. And I know that my mind, for example, I work better in the morning, so I can focus a lot on work in the morning, and then take a break, an hour, go to the gym, whatever I want to do, and then keep going because it's refreshing. And the most important part is that, as I said, there's not one way, there's no right way. Each of us has its own understanding, and it needs self-awareness to really get to avoid actually the point in which you're burning out and you're stressed out and you're not performing that much anymore. You mentioned your partner, Chris, a few times already. And I wonder, because you basically share with him the CEO role, right? So you are the co-CEO and co-founder of OBT, if I'm not wrong. And everything, I guess you're friends as well, when working. How do you manage that relationship? It's hard to keep a friendship and a partner at the same time. What is the agreement? How have you, if you have reached an agreement with him, how did you do that?
That's a really good question, and you're right. It would be very, very difficult for most people to have the dynamic and relationship that Chris and I have got. Chris and I both come from very northern England, working class upbringing, where honesty and directness is not just encouraged but almost mandatory. So Chris and I have known each other for 16 years, and we became really close friends really quickly. And I recruited Chris into A&S when he left the business that we joined together 16 years ago. He went to work for IBM. And then I managed to recruit Chris out of IBM to work at A&S when the managed services division was being built. And the level of directness and honesty that Chris and I have is a little bit unnerving to some people, but we've always had this ability, which I've had with everybody that I've worked with, to work's work. So let's, for argument's sake, we don't work 9 till 5, but just for purposes of this this conversation now, 9 till 5, that's work. And we speak to each other in a very, friendly way most of the time. But when something needs to be said, it gets said. We don't dance around our handbags. We don't, take a long run up at it. If something needs to be said, like, no, we're not doing it like that. We can't. We must do it like this. We've got to investigate that. It just gets said in a very direct. But there's never any kind of, we never sit there, I wonder if he was being funny with me then. I wonder if he's upset with me. That's never, ever, ever on our radar, ever, because work's work. And the second, we can literally have a robust conversation at 5 o'clock, for argument's sake, and then we could be going for a meal afterwards or having a drink. And it doesn't need to be said again because it was dealt with at 5.
Right.
Then we just sit there and then we're friends. And we may well talk about work again during that period. Of course we will, because we work so closely together. But we won't bring up any difficult, robust conversations unless we need to discuss what the outcome needs to be a little bit further. And we are really, close friends, best friends. And it's never really an issue. It probably helps us more than it hinders, because we can have those frank conversations and say, listen, you need to do this, you need to do this. And it's never, ever an issue. And if it ever was, I think it would be a problem going forward. And the reason that we're co-CEOs is because Chris and I always saw us, and he always saw us, and actually I think everybody that worked at A&S before pre-merger that knew us really well, I think everyone saw us as a team, as a tag team. It was a duo, really. So yes, one was the CEO and one was the COO, but everybody knew that if they needed to ask me a question, they could ask Chris the question, and Chris didn't need to ring me up and say, listen, I've just approved this, or I've just approved that, I've just decided this. If Chris said it, I would have probably said either the same thing, or I would just accept the rationale as to why Chris came to that decision and just say crack on anyway. So it's sort of that dynamic is why we chose co-CEO, because that's what we are really.
And you say you both, the both of you are very direct. You need to be there like that, coming from the region of England. And the other part actually is not just being direct, but on the other side, you need a person that is willing to listen for real, right? It's not like you just not wasting words to the air. No, it's not like just going out, blowing in the wind for real. I mean, you need a person to be there and willing to listen, and willing to understand what you're saying. It takes, once again, self-awareness. I know this is something we've been repeating a lot today, and courage, and a lot of courage, and trust, because a feedback from a person you trust is a feedback you receive well, and you're willing to take in and really improve something on that. Going back once again to something you said earlier, you've been talking a lot about decision making, and the moment you need to, come with an option and go with that option. I wonder, have you ever felt the sense of loneliness in that moment? You, not Chris, not anyone else, have to really take a decision, especially a difficult one.
So but many times as a CEO, but people often describe it as a very lonely job. No matter the team that you've got around you, sometimes the only person who can make the decision, is allowed to make the decision because it's such a big one, is the CEO. And obviously, as businesses get more corporate and larger, you have the wider board and the chair that obviously takes some of that responsibility away. But when you're still under 100 million or up to 150 million, and sometimes the decision does lie with an individual, and that can be lonely and it can be nerve-wracking. And I think anybody that doesn't say that they get nervous as in a CEO, I think it's just hubris, really. I think it is. I can't take people like that very seriously. It's like, well, actually, I think that's a level of arrogance that if you're not nervous for something like that, that actually you're not treating that decision with the respect that it deserves and it needs. So yeah, we had a couple of occasions. We were probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we were divesting or trying to divest ourselves of an area of the business that wasn't very profitable anymore. We'd sort of become we were subpar at that area because we weren't focusing on it. It was just something, it was a legacy part of the business that we were still doing, but we were doing badly. And there was actually probably more value in divesting ourselves and selling that part of the business to another business that still focused on it. But that meant that about 35 people were going to have to be tupied over to this new business or to lose the jobs. And that was an incredibly difficult decision for someone who's spoken about people the way I've spoken about them for the last half an hour or so. That's a very, very, very difficult decision. But going back to that, doing the right thing, it was the wrong thing for those people, but I was making the decision for the right reason, because in order to maintain a business that was focused, could grow for the remaining 200 people, I had to make a tough decision. And I think the only thing really that got me through making that decision was knowing that actually all the people that were going to either move over or have to go and find other jobs, they were excellent people in the tech industry where jobs were and still are abundant. So I thought they will get other jobs, and I've got to make this decision. I'm the only person who can make the decision, and I had to say yes, it was the right thing to do. Ironically, going through that pain, we actually decided against it right at the 11th hour because we couldn't get the valuation that we wanted. But we actually went through all the pain of the process of telling all those people, and then we decided not to do it because we couldn't get the value for it anyway. So that made it even tougher, going through that really, really horrible process with people who worked at the company for a long time, only then not to do it. So you think to yourself, well, maybe I should have not decided not to go through that process because I would have saved the pain. But the only way I found out that it wasn't going to get the value was to go through that pain. So that was really, really tough.
Yeah, and actually, you support my thesis, not a thesis. When we talk about the loneliness of leaders, in the episode 13, I talked to Matthew Gold. He's a coach, and actually, he said that the loneliness of leader can be mitigated. Actually, can be, in a way, completely canceled, if you will. And I actually agree with you. Even if you have the best stuff, even if you have a lot of people supporting the decision, at the end of the day, you leader decide, and you will take the responsibility for your decision, not the board, not the staff, not everyone else has been counseling you on that decision you're taking. And you will go to sleep thinking about the right thing, or what you think is the right thing or not, and taking all the consequences with it. Well, thank you for sharing this story, Paul. Once again, it makes everything much clearer. And I guess there are decisions that you've taken that probably, you didn't know, they did not land well, led to some failure of some kind. How did you deal with that?
Relatively straightforwardly, really. I am an incredibly robust, thick-skinned, resilient person, and failure doesn't scare me. I don't want to fail often, but when I do fail, it doesn't upset me as much as it might do, other people, the average other person. It just doesn't. I think to myself, well, yes, okay, that was the wrong decision, but we knew we had multiple options at the beginning, so we've chosen the wrong one for the right reasons. That's okay. The sooner we recognise that it's failed, the quicker we can move on to one of the other options that we weren't sure about at the beginning, but have actually now, some of the concerns we had about option B, for example, have now either crystallised or disappeared because we've tried option A. So let's just get on to option B as quickly as possible. No matter how much work we've sunk into option A, we tried never to that concept of throwing good money after bad. If we know it's the wrong decision, we've just got to stop, draw a line under it, say well done to everyone to getting us to the point where we've realised that it's not going to work anymore. And I'm sorry for all the work that you've done, but you're going to have to chuck it in the bin, and we're going to have to come over to option B now, because we have to get to the end point. We have to get the right outcome. We're just going to have to do it a different way than we thought. So yes, we had failures. They weren't often, they weren't regular. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been as successful as we were. But there were some big ones, and you just have to adapt to it and say that's okay. And if you've got to then go and speak to investors, or you've got to speak to other people that had some skin in the game to explain why, that was my job. And I recognised and understood the only person who's got to take the responsibility to stand in front of the people who are paying for this is me. That's my job. So I wouldn't sell to them necessarily. I wouldn't, make up stories or make it say. I'll just hit them and go, listen, the best way to deal with this is just give you the truth and be really direct with it. This didn't work because of X, Y, Z, but now we're doing A, B, C, and we've already started. I know it's suboptimal, but we're already moving again. And for me, if someone does that to me, it's very, very difficult to be upset with them. If someone just holds hands up and say, listen, I'm sorry, but that didn't work, but we're now doing this. To be really negative or pejorative to that person in that circumstance feels churlish and borderline nasty. So why would you do that? You just got to go, okay, we have got to do a drains up to understand how we don't make those mistakes again, but crack on with what you do. We'll do the drains up later. And that's just the way I think it's got to be handled.
Right. And what I see in this conversation is that you're going a long way, to be the CEO of OBT, and you have a great experience, and you've done a lot of things. Let me ask you: is there anything that you would do differently if you know what you know today? If you knew what you know today?
I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? Because I have these academic conversations with people occasionally, and they are academic conversations. But the thing that always there are things that I wish had gone better, and there are things that I think, well, if we hadn't done that, we might have had a better outcome here. But actually, ultimately, if you change one part of that history, then where you ended up would be different, and it might not necessarily be different better. It might be different worse. So I think to myself, I sort of try and be in that position where you don't really have any regrets, because the way I look at it and I think about it, I don't think there is anybody out there who used to work with me who would say, well, Paul Shannon treated me badly, and he's not a good person, he's a terrible leader. There may well be people out there that say, well, I wish Paul Shannon would have done something differently, but I don't think anyone was sat there going, he's a bad person. So that makes me feel comfortable. I've always tried to behave properly when it comes to working with suppliers and partners and customers and build great relationships. So I think I look to myself and go, if I look back at my career up until this point, I've done lots of things really well. I've done some things that I wish I would have done slightly differently, but I'm really happy where I am now. I've got an amazing business partner in a fledgling business that we're doing really, really well. I have a much better amount of spare time in my personal life now as I've got to 43 and in my 40s now. I have a lot more time to spend with my kids than I ever had before. So, I thought I might regret leaving A&S. I hoped I wouldn't, but I thought I might, and I don't at all, because all the rest of the positive parts of my life are really positive. So I try to have a sort of no regrets policy really on life, and I think it stands me in relatively good stead.
That's great. That's great. I mean, basically, you're satisfied where you are right now, and even if you look back, there is nothing will change, and that's beautiful. And it takes it takes really a lot of bravery to take some decisions, especially the one about A&S you mentioned earlier. So congratulations. Well, we are almost at the end of the podcast, so let me ask you my final question. Let's imagine someone comes to you and asks you for an advice. It's like, hey, Paul, I want to be a great leader. What is the suggestion you would give to this person?
Well, probably just be brave. Be brave. If you don't feel like you're a brave person now, find a way of getting some bravery, because there are lots and lots and lots of people who believe that they could be a CEO, and undoubtedly there are a lot more people out there that could be CEOs that never make it. And I think a lot of that is to do with bravery, and that bravery is multifaceted. Really, it's to do with being brave in picking people that other people might not pick, but you've got the trust in them to believe that they're going to be a material contributor to helping build a quality business. It can be being brave about making a very difficult decision. It can be brave about dropping a legacy product that lots of people have still got an investment in, but in deep down it's the wrong technology or product for pushing you forward. You've got to be brave, and it helps when you've got a really great team around you to be brave, because you know that you're going to get supported in those brave decisions. But even if you don't feel like you've got a huge network around you that are going to support, you've got to be brave anyway, because fortune does favour the brave, and you've got to go and do it. Otherwise, anyone could do the job.
But with the sensational people we were talking at the beginning, it's better.
Yeah, always. Life is better. Yeah, life is better with sensational people, and so is work.
So thank you for this sensational conversation, Paul. It's been very interesting looking at leadership from your perspective and through your eyes, and looking at your career and all the decisions you've done. And I do understand when you talk about sensational people, you mean. I think we have a sensational person in front of us. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.